Hey. Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chaser, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout. Mic check, lights flash, game time, stay ready. 2 vets in the zone, keep the pressure real heavy. Big hits, big plays, yeah, we breaking it down. Truth rings in your speakers, every word is the crown. From the north side hustle to that southern flame. Midwest grind, west coast of the game. Sports talk kings, yeah, we wear that crown. Turn it up, let them know it's about to go down. Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chaser, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout.
It's about to go down.
Hey. Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chaser, no
What's
doubt.
up, ladies and gentlemen?
It's the order we shout.
2-5 is here. Sports reports is order.
In
your ears, in your
real heavy. Big hits, big plays, yeah, we breaking it down. Truth rings in your speakers.
Yes. So look, we got some picks to get to tonight, right? NFL week 2. College football week 3, but I'm going to start us off with some opening thoughts. But while I get to that, do me a favor out there. Like, review, subscribe, share, rate, do all the free things. Do all the good things. That's right. It costs nothing. And I got me a liquid death. How about you? So let's get right to it. Opening thoughts. So week 2 of the NFL is upon us, and the Bengals can't be that offensively deficient right now. I know that offensive line has issues, but it can't look like that again, right? Same with the Texans, except it can, because they have injuries on that offensive line now. So there's a couple of teams out here that we have to think about seriously, right? When you're looking at making picks and these things, you have to remember this isn't college football. This is the NFL. So you might have your Georgias against your Austin Peas when we're talking about college football and things like that. But when we're talking about NFL, these teams have talent, right? You know, there might be more levels to this. Like there might be a team that has a star, you know, like say Minnesota, for example, has Justin Jefferson, but the whole team collectively, as they play the Bears or somebody along those lines, you can't say that, oh, hey, this team is so much more talented. And that's what makes the NFL so fun. You know, whereas obviously college football has a little bit more of the stuff that I was talking about. So, for example, you know, you got Kansas City playing against Philly this weekend. And I know a lot of people are counting Kansas City out. You shouldn't do that. You just shouldn't, you know, because we've learned too much over the years that shows that Kansas City knows how to win, especially if it's a close game. You know, can they do what's necessary in those moments? So let's get right into it, right? Let's make these picks. So, taking it from the top, my top, that is, pause. You know, saying we're looking at the Broncos in the Colts. So, of course, the Colts are going to be overcorrected by the market because of what they did to Miami last weekend. But if you've been listening to Sports Reports as Order, you already knew that we picked Miami to finish last in the AFC East anyway. So, even though, you know, we didn't expect Miami to get blown out that way, weren't very high on Miami this season. So I don't want to overreact and just say, hey, the Colts are here. The Colts have made it. They have not. They still have Daniel Jones at quarterback. And even though he looked the part last week, we're going to find out for real now against a real good defense in the Denver Broncos. We saw what they did to Cam Ward last week. Harassment, you know, assault, battery, all the things. So when I look at this matchup, a couple of things come to mind. They played last season. Now, obviously, Anthony Richardson was the quarterback, but that game was partially the reason why the Colts didn't make the playoffs last year, because Jonathan Taylor decided to get cute at the goal line and drop the ball. When he could have scored, they win that game, and we're having a whole different conversation headed into week 18. So now that we're coming back now, the Denver Broncos have something in their backfield. R.J. Harvey, the rookie. I like him a lot. He brings an element to the game that the Broncos didn't have last season. Now, we see Javonte Williams and how he looked against Philadelphia last week for the Cowboys, but he was coming off an injury last year, so they didn't have the run game threat that they had. Now, on the other hand, Bo Nix looked terrible last week. 40 passes for 176 yards, 2 interceptions, and they were very awful interceptions. I know the other day I was talking about how bad Brock Purdy's interceptions were, but no, Bo Nix takes the cake on the bad interceptions. And, against a team that wasn't really noted for their defense. So obviously he has to cut down the mistakes. The Colts have to find a way to make them one-dimensional. So if Shane Steichen knows what he's doing, and I think he does, you can't in one breath have people saying that he's credited for what we saw from Jalen Hurts at one point, and then just think that he forgot how to coach within 2 or 3 years, right? So I think he knows what he's doing. So what that means to me is that we're going to see a lot of Tyler Warren this weekend, the rookie from Penn State. You know me, I'm 2'5". I got the outlandish thoughts like he should have won the Heisman last year when you talk about the impact that he had on the team and the results of that team. So I think Tyler Warren's going to get, a lot of production this weekend because when you have Patrick Surtain on one side, Riley Moss and Barron out there, it's going to be tough for Michael Pittman. I'm not a big Michael Pittman guy to begin with, but I've been waiting for Josh Downs. Maybe you hit Alec Pierce a little deep. That was the one thing that Anthony Richardson could do. So we might have to find out, can Daniel Jones make those passes? Because we've seen in the past that we call him Danny Dimes because of the short passes, the slants, the precision on the dig routes, the curls and those things. But when it comes to the deep ball, not so much. But all things created equal. I'm going to take the Broncos in a close game here, 23-20. I'm not throwing the Colts away. I'm just being realistic about them. So then, of course, the big matchup that I just brought up a few minutes ago, Super Bowl rematch, Philadelphia going into Arrowhead Stadium. Now, I know the easy, logical thought in this situation is Philly's going to smash them. We saw the Super Bowl 40-22. We know what happened. We know Patrick Mahomes was running for his life. It's not the same Philadelphia team. For one, they lost a lot of production on that defense. Josh Sweat, for example. Jalen Carter will be there, so the defense should look better than it looked against Dallas last week. But that other corner spot is a major concern. I'm not concerned about Quinyon Mitchell, but even though if you go back and look at that tape last week, he was doing a lot of that Sauce Gardner. He was grabbing out there, and he even got called for a couple of pass interferences. But on that other side, Adoree Jackson, Jacorian Bennett, I don't think so. Now, Xavier Worthy got hurt last week for Kansas City, but there are rumors that he might give it a go this weekend. On the other side, Dallas Goedert, a little injured. I was concerned about what I saw from Kansas City's defense last week because that was the one unit that I knew I could depend on. Last season we saw the Chiefs struggling to score. They only scored over 30. I think it was 3 times. So when you look at that on the surface, you say to yourself, the defense has to carry the day. But when they played the Chargers last week, Steve Spagnuolo just backed up and said, hey, Justin Herbert, you want 15 yards? Why don't you have 20? That zone was not effective by any means. And you don't have to worry about, Jalen Hurts making Justin Herbert type throws. But I imagine that Philly's going to get A.J. Brown a little more involved this week. I know he had the hamstring issues going on, but you figure another week, some more healing, maybe he's a little bit better. Now, Patrick Mahomes, 19-4 in his career coming off of a loss. They've never started 0-2 while he's been the quarterback. In his career, they've never lost 3 in a row. So something's got to give here, right? So can Philadelphia control the clock? Because they got that man back in the backfield, Saquon Barkley. So can he get a little loose? That was the one thing that Kansas City did okay in the Super Bowl is they limited him somewhat. So they need to do that again. We need to see a run game from Kansas City. Can they create running plays? Can they create space? And if they can't, can they use the short passing game as their run game? They still got Juju out there. They still got Hollywood Brown out there. Travis Kelce, the Eagles tend to defend him very well. So it's going to take one of these guys to step up. Now, the other thing we saw last week against the Chargers was that Kansas City offensive line is not fixed. And why would it be, right? Because we saw them in the Super Bowl. Last week was week 1 of the season. Why would it be fixed? So, of course, you're concerned going up against Philadelphia. But all things created equal. Against my better judgment, y'all. Against my better judgment. I'm taking the Chiefs at home. And this is going to be a low-scoring game. So for all you degenerates out there, go ahead and knock on that under. You know what I'm saying? I'm going 20-17 here. I just think that Kansas City can't afford to go 0-2. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is the NFL. So this isn't one of those situations where you have this great team playing against a team that doesn't belong on the field with them. So I'm going to give Kansas City the edge here. You know, Coach Andy Reid, these offensive coaches, him, Sean McVay, back when John Gruden was coaching, a lot of these guys, you don't want to give them a second look. You know, they played against you a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago, whatever the case may be. They saw what you threw at them. Now they have time to formulate and adjust. And I know that Kansas City has circled this game. And if you know anything about champions, you know about the heart of a champion. So even though I'm not the biggest Kansas City Chief guy, I'm rolling with them for this weekend. Now, a game that I am very interested in, happens at MetLife Stadium. The New York Jets, the Jetropolitans, are bringing in the Buffalo Bills. Why am I interested in this game? Well, it could have something to do with during the offseason, I talked about how the Jets are going to be second place in the division. But throw that to the side. Buffalo's coming off of that game against Baltimore where they spent everything to get back into it. A Sunday night football game. And granted, they're not traveling far. They're in the same state, so it's not like they're going all the way out to the West Coast or anything like that. But those are the type of things that I look for. Like, is Buffalo going to get off to another slow start? You know, is this going to be the beginning of Buffalo relying on superhero Josh to save the day every week? You know, Justin Fields looked much improved. And somebody said to me the other day, hey, Justin Fields can actually throw the ball. Yes, he was a monster at Ohio State. But when you get to the NFL, the speed of the game is different. And you got to remember, right? He's had these defensive head coaches throughout his whole career. Still does, Aaron Glenn. But I don't understand why teams like the Jets or teams that employ a quarterback like Justin Fields don't just look at tape, right? You got the old school, right? Relatively speaking. The Jacksonville Jaguars, you know, Maurice Jones-Drew, Fred Taylor, David Gerard. Now, obviously, David Gerard's not the type of runner that Fields is. But that's just an extra element that you can take advantage of. And you got Garrett Wilson out there on the outside going up against this Buffalo secondary. So unless we see some cover 2 shell, unless we see some safety over the top, you know, I don't know if they're going to be able to slow him down. Now, they have other receivers that are crafty, you know, Lazard and such. But the run game is what's going to be important because there was something that I noted about Buffalo last week. And this might have been always true in the last couple of years and why they can't beat Kansas City, but it just hit me. You know, and I was looking at them against the Ravens, and they just didn't look like the same thing. You know, the Ravens were big, burly, husky, strong, fast. You know, they looked like the new generation of athlete. Whereas Buffalo kind of looked like what I think the younger generation would imagine that old school NBA players would look like against current NBA players. Like Buffalo just looked slow. They looked a step out of place. They didn't look as intimidating or imposing. So I wonder how they're going to match up with the Jets because the Jets have some of those same elements. The difference is the players aren't as good as the players on the Ravens, right? So the other problem that the Jets have is Brandon Stevens. Now, I don't know how you watched any tape of him last year and thought to yourself, this guy is going to help our team. You know, he's out there looking like Darius Slay while being half the age. So I don't know what they were thinking there. With that being said, the Bills gave up 8.2 yards per carry to the Ravens last week. Yeah, I said that right. 8.2 yards per carry. Now, do I think the Jets are going to average 8.2 yards per carry? Absolutely not. How realistic is that? But what if they average 5.5? That's definitely possible. Keep that clock running, keep it churning, keep Buffalo off the field. That's the method to win this game. What up, Mike? You know what I'm saying? One Mike Podcast. Y'all coming back tomorrow. Make sure y'all checking that out. You know what I'm saying? My bad, man. It was a last minute thing, man. My bad. But it's one of those things where the Jets, are a better team talent-wise than they're being credited for. And I think people are just looking at the Jets as you're the Jets, as if this isn't a new year, a new regime, a new era of Jets football. Now, I'm not saying that makes them a contender or anything along those lines. Let's not get hyperbolic here. But I'm going to give the Jets a chance to win this game. I'm not going to pick it. Not going to pick it. But the Jets have a chance to win this game. I'm going to go 28-24 Buffalo. So then, down in the Steel City, over in Pittsburgh, we got another revenge game. Last week, Aaron Rodgers got to go against his former team. This time it's DK Metcalf's turn. The Seattle Seahawks. Now, the Steelers. We know the Steelers for defense. Hard-nosed, run the football, tough yards, tough to get yards against, right? Except if we go back to the end of last season, because I know a lot of people are focused on, look at what the Jets did to them. The Jets put up 32 points. They couldn't stop Justin Fields. Guess what? When it came to the second half of last season, they didn't stop anybody. They didn't stop a damn soul. And that's odd, right? When you look at who their head coach is, when you look at their culture, when you look at the fact that they got TJ Watt. I like Joey Porter Jr. out there. I don't like Darius Slay. I already made that known. But this defense is not the steel curtain. It's not anything that resembles anything that we think of when you hear the words Pittsburgh Steelers. The problem for Seattle is they got a guy on the other side that had a great season last year. But when you need Sam Darnold, when you say, Sam, this is your game, we need you ain't getting nothing. You ain't getting nothing. So now Seattle has to emphasize that run game. You have to, just because we saw what the Jets did to the Steelers last week. So with that being said, Seattle needs another receiver to step up. I know they got Cooper Kupp. He's not the same. They got my guy, Torrey Horton from Colorado State. So what I do expect, and I want you to keep your eye on this, if it doesn't happen, tell me 2-5, you were wrong. If it happens, say 2-5, you got that one. Hey, Torrey Horton is going to get a deep ball this game. He's going to make Pittsburgh pay at some point in this game. JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba, he got 59% of Seattle's passing targets last week. And like I said, that's with Cooper Kupp on the field. It makes no sense. The Jets ran for 182 yards on the Steelers last week, 4.7 yards per carry. You think that's unsteeler-like? You heard what I just said. So, Aaron Rodgers, the play-action king last week. Mike McDonald is bringing a defense in there that is going to bring pressure. They're going to bring the heat. They're going to make Aaron get rid of the ball quicker than he wants to. Now, the good news is, over the course of his career, we've seen Aaron Rodgers be smart and throw the ball away. He old now. He's going to make a mistake at some point in this game. The question is, can Seattle make him pay? Calvin Austin, Jalen Warren, Ben Schwernick. These guys caught touchdown passes, but I need to see the rookie, Caleb Johnson. I need to see some Roman Wilson. The Steelers have other players that need to be involved. The Steelers are also injured. Deshaun Elliott, is he going to go? Malik Harrison, knee injuries, both of them knee injuries. And Joey Porter, who I mentioned earlier, has hamstring tightness. Now, what Seattle did do last week, to my point a few seconds ago, they hit Brock Purdy 9 times last week. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that San Francisco's offensive line is better than Pittsburgh's. The only difference here is that Seattle's on the road versus being at home. The only difference is I picked San Francisco to beat Seattle last week, and I'm picking Seattle this week. That's the difference. Seahawks victory. All right, Giants and Cowboys, NFC East battle. You can tell by my colors who I represent. NFC East is in the building, SEC style, right? All right, so Giants and Cowboys. Dak Prescott absolutely owns the NFC East and the Giants. We've talked about that. 33-9 career record after the loss to Philadelphia last week against the NFC East. Watching Russell Wilson last week made me very sad. As a big Wu-Tang Clan fan, right? I learned about how Capadonna turned in all his jewelry and all his money, and he went out and drove cabs. That was Russell Wilson last week. He was the cab driver, not the bus driver, the cab driver. So I would have started Jackson Dart. That's just me. I don't do this whole, hey, we're rebuilding, but we're not rebuilding. Let's take it slow. Like, pick a direction and stay in that direction. So you're either rebuilding or you're trying to make the playoffs. And you can't sit up here and tell me that you started Russell Wilson with the thought that he gives you the best chance to win. You could have started Jameis for all of that. But anyway, I digress. So the Giants' defensive line is a problem. You got Abdul Carter. He blocked a punt last week, right? He got in on a sack. Kayvon Thibodeau bringing pressure. Brian Burns. So the Giants have talent. The problem is that once you get past them, then what? Right? Dallas, much to my chagrin, and every time I look at this TV, Houston's got the football. Has Colorado touched the ball yet? Anyway, so as I was, saying, Dallas looked a lot better than I thought they would last week. From the standpoint of, I thought it would be a little slow process for Dak. You're going up against the champs in their building, coming off that horrific injury that he had. He looked great. Like, he looked like he was back in should have been MVP form against the Eagles. And all you did was add George Pickens over there. I talked about Javonte Williams and how better he looked, earlier. So the question for Dallas for me is always going to be this season, their defense. I made a comment earlier when we were previewing the season that are they going to be the Bengals this year where they can light up the scoreboard, but they can't stop anybody? DeRon Bland is hurt now. So the Giants can't take advantage of it. They can't score. Cam Scatterbull, I'm looking forward to see more of him. But at the end of the day, Russell Wilson ran 8 rushes, 44 yards last week. The rest of the Giants, the running backs, the people that are actually paid to take the handoff and run the ball, 15 carries for 30 yards. That's not going to work here. I don't care if Micah Parsons is in, the middle of Wisconsin. You can't win like that in today's NFL, no matter how much these teams pass. So give me Dallas. I don't care what the spread is. Just give it to me. I'm going to go with Dallas along the lines of, say, 31-10 in this game. And I'd be surprised if the Giants actually get to 10. So the game of the week, potentially, for all you people out there that think that offense is the only way to play football. Jacksonville is going up to Ohio to play the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I expect the Bengals to go off this week. Joe Burrow held to 113 yards. And if you do the math, that was one more yard than what Cam Ward did last week against the Broncos. The Bengals as a team, 7 yards total in the second half. Now, I've been on record way before this season started. Zach Taylor need to be up out of there. The only reason he even there is because he knows Sean McVay. They hung out together once or twice or something. So, I'm not sold on Cincinnati. I don't think they're a playoff team. But you got to trust the talent. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Chase Brown, who I loved coming out the draft. Jacksonville, on the other hand, did something kind of crazy last week. And it's not that we haven't seen it before. It just doesn't make sense from this team. They ran for 200 yards. I don't care if it was against the Carolina Panthers. That's what they did. I've heard that Travis Hunter's going to play a little bit more defense this week. I don't know who that helps. You ain't putting them on Jamar Chase. Say he's fast, but he ain't big enough to deal with T. Higgins. So I don't know what you're going to do with Travis Hunter that you couldn't do last week. And, we did see him on tech like I wanted, and we saw how that went. So, but I think Jacksonville is coming into this game with a little momentum. Amarius Sims is hurt for the Bengals with the ankle. Jacksonville did something last week something else that they don't normally do. Last year, they finished last in the NFL forcing turnovers. They forced 3 last week. So I think this is going to be, as I like to call it, a pinball game where they just go like this. Who's pulling the lever? And I'm going to pick Jacksonville. I'm going to take Jacksonville in the upset in this game, and I'm going to call it along the lines of 31-27. Bears at Lions. Ben Johnson, how bad does he want this game? Going up against your former team, Caleb Williams coming off that Monday night game, that he's been in the film room. That he's been on the clipboard. Ben Johnson has been, he studied this week probably more than he's ever studied in his whole career. Now, the Detroit Lions, they're coming off of a shellacking. And we saw what Green Bay did to my team last night. So it might not even be any shame in that. But you got 2 new coordinators. The last time we saw Chicago go to Detroit, you remember? It was last Thanksgiving. The Bears and their clock management, Caleb Williams didn't know what to do with the game on the line, get in field goal range, letting the clock run. But you got a tactician at head coach now. The Bears have talent. They're literally just waiting for Caleb to turn the switch in his brain on. But maybe the fingernail polish has done something to that switch and it's malfunctioning. But look, Detroit is not going to run the ball as bad as they did last week against Green Bay. I just think that the Lions are the way better team here. I know that a lot of people had the Bears as their sexy surprise playoff pick. And I said it when we did our NFC North preview. The only people that were picking Minnesota or Chicago to win that division were just trying to be trendy and edgy. You just wanted to be different, to say that you did it for the mere chance that it happened. Caleb Williams, for all his fault last week, he was the only person that ran the ball worth a damn against against Minnesota. He did throw that one pass late in the game that tried to get DJ Moore sliced in half. And I don't care what anybody says. Something going on between those two. I don't think that's a relationship there. So the Bears played a lot of man coverage against Minnesota. I wonder if we're going to see different looks this week because you got Jameson Williams over the top, right? I'm going with Detroit here. I just think that they're the better team. They're at home. As bad as Ben Johnson wants this game, he doesn't have the quarterback that can do it for him. 100%, Mike. Carolina at Arizona. I'm not getting too much into this. Give me the Cardinals. Browns at the Ravens. So back to the Bengals for a quick second because I have to talk about them to make the point that I'm about to make about the Browns. The Browns outgained Cincinnati last week, 327-141. Held them to 7 yards in the second half, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, and lost the damn game. They scored 16 points. Now, granted, they lost the game because of their kicker. And I've been arguing with Browns fans all week, because, hey, it's the same thing I said about the Giants. You got old man Flacco. He'll bring some stability, but after this year, if he leaves, then what, right? So, in that game, Joe Flacco played a pretty damn good game. Cincinnati made 2 Madden-esque interceptions where the receiver's on the ground, bounces off his hands, pops up in the air. So Cincinnati's defense is still Cincinnati's defense. The problem is the rest of the Browns' offense is still the Browns' offense. So I wonder how this team functions, right? You've had all the drama in the offseason. Dylan Gabriel, Shador. Does Kevin Stefanski know what he's doing, even though he was coach of the year a couple of years ago? I would say it's more of a franchise thing. But Myles Garrett went back there for a reason. Now, he did his job last week. There was a 3-play sequence where he sacked Joe Burrow twice and then hit him on the third one, just didn't get the sack. So the defensive line is coming. Now, the problem is the Ravens lost that game the way they lost that game. The Ravens are going to come out with their hair on fire. Home opener coming off of that loss. And I think with the Ravens, we're entering a zone here. We always talk about, can Buffalo beat Kansas City? I think that's where we are with the Ravens. Can they beat Buffalo? Everybody else ain't a problem. except for maybe Kansas City too. But, it is what it is. But what I want this weekend from the Cleveland Browns, I want to see more Harold Fanning. So I think that there's matchups that he can exploit against Baltimore's defense. There's not a lot that the Browns can do to exploit the Baltimore defense. The Ravens are the first team in NFL history to lose a game while having a 15-point lead with 4 minutes left in the game. Don't think that they don't know that. Todd Monken, just run the ball. It's an easy formula. The Browns can't stop you. But bettors beware, because I did see the spread at 12.5. In their last 7 games, the Browns are 4-3 against the Ravens. Just keep that in mind, but not this time. Patriots at Dolphins, and I saw Tyreek Hill out here, just a few minutes ago. I saw a clip of him arguing with the reporter. Hey, when's the next time you go to catch a pass for 30 yards? And, he's like, you trying to piss me off? You should be already pissed off. Say that's something other than women. Now, so with that being said, Tyreek Hill has not eclipsed 40 yards but 4 times since last season. And then granted, last week was just 1 game. But it was against the Colts. It wasn't against the no-fly zone. But anyway. So, Diggs. He got 6 catches for 57 yards last week, but it still doesn't look fluid yet. Drake May looks the part. He had a decent game last week, had the pick, but had a decent game. The good news is you don't have to worry about Miami's secondary putting up much resistance. And, knock on wood, I don't want to say it's good news, but for the Patriots it is, Storm Duck is hurt. He's the best corner that Miami has. You still got Minkah Fitzpatrick back there, the crafty vet. But on the outsides, Drake May should be able to have a field day if the receivers show up. Because Kayshon Boutte, 7 catches for 103 yards. He's been the unsung hero of the Patriots. He's one of these LSU receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, so on and so forth. But he fell in the draft. He's every bit as talented as them. Now, I'm not saying he could do what they do per se, but he's not that far off their talent level. He just doesn't get the credit because of where he was drafted. So, look, Tua, 14-23, 114 yards, 2 picks, a fumble last week. Houston just kicked the ball off to Colorado. I told you every time I look up, so now I can report to you Colorado has the ball. All right, so if Drake May can't have a good game here, if Tua can't have a good game here, then what are we doing this season? I think these two are the bottom teams in the AFC East. I think that Miami probably has more offensive talent. The Patriots have more defensive talent. But I don't know if either have the systems in place to take advantage of that. What I do know is that Miami's going to struggle in these short distance situations, these 3rd and 1s, 4th and 1s, if they have to go for it. They don't tend to do well in those situations. And this is what happens when you focus on being a track team instead of a football team. Jalen Waddle's got the shoulder injury. We know Christian Gonzalez had the hamstring. So there's a lot of questions in this game. Last thing on this game is that the Patriots have a cheat code. You just got to use him. His name is Travion Henderson. Just use him. You have a template in the Detroit Lions, Jahmyr Gibbs. Just give him the ball, and you'll win this game. But I'm going to pick the Patriots anyway because I just don't trust the Dolphins. Rams at Titans. How would you like to be Cam Ward? Welcome to the NFL, young man. We're going to send you out to Mile High Stadium to possibly play the best defense in the NFL in your first start. You know what we're going to do next week? You get to go home, but we're going to bring Jarrett Verse, Braden Fisk, Kobe Turner and the gang to your crib. So if you thought he was running for his life last week, what do you think is going to happen this week? Now, granted, the Rams secondary isn't as good as the Broncos secondary, but it doesn't need to be if you got that type of pass rush. Ask CJ Stroud about it. The question for me this whole season is always week to week going to be, what is Matthew Stafford going to look like? You don't have back issues and get epidurals and just come out every week gunslinging in the way that we're used to you gunslinging. Just my thoughts. Cam Ward in that game against Denver, 12 of 28, 112 yards. But this is the kicker. And nobody can win this way. They went 2 for 14 on third down. I don't care who you're playing. You go 2 for 14 on third down, you're not going to win. Problem with this game is that if the Titans have 14 third down opportunities, they might go 2 for 14. So give me the Rams, but it's going to be a closer game than I'm making it sound like. I said I'll just be upfront about that. This is going to be a game that goes into the fourth quarter. It might be 20-13 at that point. And Tennessee's going to have a chance to drive down the field and just not get it done. And then the Rams will add on a late score. And then somebody will say, hey, 2-5. Titans got dominated. No, just watch the game. Niners and Saints. Do I really have to watch Mac Jones? Do I really have to watch Mac Jones? I've been watching the NFL for way too long for this league to treat me this way. And you should demand better too. Mac Jones is coming to start this game. Now, Spencer Rattler, had a pretty good game last week, was about that close from taking the Cardinals to overtime. Looked a lot better than I thought they would. Now, not only Brock Purdy out, George Kittle's out for a few weeks. You got Brandon Ayuk still not there. Jawan Jennings still not 100%. The 49ers, I wouldn't say they're in trouble right now because they have the easiest schedule in the league. But what they do have going for them is the Saints, because the Saints are probably the worst team in the league, to be honest with you. We'll see how it plays out over the season, but coming into this year, that was my thought. To prove my point, not even the fact that Spencer Rattler is their starter. He's a decent quarterback. He just needs more time, needs more reps. They gave up 46% third down conversion percentage to the Cardinals last week. Now, the Mac Jones point that may save the 49ers in this game, if you remember, when he got drafted, there was a lot of talk about how Kyle Shanahan was in love with him, wanted to bring him in, saw him as his quarterback of the future. So now he gets to play with his little shiny toy. I just can't pick the Saints. I'm sorry. I'm going with the 49ers, ball control, make the plays that are necessary, and the Saints aren't going to get much done on offense themselves. So, Sunday Night Football. Falcons and Vikings. Oh, if this ain't a game, this might be another pinball special, right? So, Michael Penix is going to have a rough time. I think we might see him scramble a little more than Atlanta might want him to, because we know Brian Flores is going to mix it up. He's going to bring the heat. The good news is there might not be an Andrew Van Ginkel. So that's one less person to put pressure on Michael Penix. But what Minnesota did this offseason is they focused their energy because they already had Justin Jefferson. They had Jordan Addison, even though he's suspended right now. They had Aaron Jones. They brought in Jordan Mason. But they worked on both lines of scrimmages. They brought in defenders, Jonathan Allen, for example. They brought in offensive linemen to make their offensive line better, even though Mark Kelly is a little banged up. So the point is they knew they had a young quarterback that might take some time to develop. And I don't care what happened in that fourth quarter against Chicago the other night. J.J. McCarthy is still a work in progress. That was a great finish, but let's not overreact like we tend to do. I saw articles out here talking about he's the guy, he's the leader, he's all this and all that. What if he throws 3 picks this week? Y'all gonna call me a hater for pointing that out like we did with Arch Manning? Anyway, so this is a B. John Robinson game. This is a Kyle Pitts game. We'll see if Darnell Mooney plays, because I've often said that he's the Falcons' best receiver. Now, obviously, Drake London might be more overall traditionally talented, but Darnell Mooney just makes plays. You need a guy like that on your football team. San Francisco has that with Jawan Jennings. So I just think that, Dallas Mike, one Mike out here talking about he a Michigan guy. JJ ain't it. And I ain't going to go that far. I think JJ has talent, but it's only been one game. So the Falcons defense over the course of this season, I think is going to gain a little steam and get a little bit better. I love Xavier Watts, the rookie out of Notre Dame at safety. The problem with the Falcons is they don't. What I just talked about with Minnesota, how they focused on the trenches and the lines of scrimmage, that's Atlanta's problem. Atlanta has all the weaponry that you could ever ask for, but it doesn't matter if they can't block. You could have, AJ Terrell back there, Xavier Watts that I just brought out. Don't matter if you can't get sacks and pressure the quarterback. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I don't want to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and pick Atlanta to win this game. And if nothing else, we know there's going to be drama because nobody does drama like the Atlanta Falcons. You talk about Love Allen and all that stuff. No. Atlanta Falcons is where it's at. So, Tampa at Houston. This is a game that I've gone back and forth on. I've been wrecking my brain trying to figure out who to pick in this game. And, just in case you were wondering, it looks like Colorado's getting the ball again. So, there you go. Tampa, their offense was efficient last week, but it wasn't what we expected. Now, granted, they got a new offensive coordinator and everything. Emeka Egbuka, 2 touchdowns in his first game. Bucky Irvin, so Tampa actually can run the ball now. The Texans, on the other hand, had that slugfest with the Rams. So they showed that they could go toe-to-toe defensively. But I don't know if Tampa's the team that you want to see with your weakened offensive line, and now you're missing a starter off of said offensive line. They're at home. So I tried to do the Kansas City thing, right? Because earlier I picked Kansas City over Philadelphia this week based on, this is the NFL, expect the unexpected, those type of things. I was leaning in that same direction with the Titans. The Texans. I was looking in that same direction. I just can't get there. I tried. I really did. Big. I tried. Honest. Chargers and Raiders. The other Monday Night Football game. Now, this one is a big game. And I know what you're thinking. The Raiders, big game? Yes. Because do you want the Chargers to start off 2-0 in this division? Now, I do because I picked the Chargers to win the division. But, if you're Kansas City, who's already a game in the hole, do you want the Chargers to start 2-0? If you're the Broncos, do you want the Chargers to start 2-0? And you haven't played a division game yet. The Raiders, coming off a win, feeling good about themselves, do you want to lose your first division game? So, first of all, I'm surprised that they're both 1-0. I picked the Raiders to win last week, but it was just one of those things. But, Justin Herbert, like I said, last week, there was a lot of cushion that Kansas City gave those receivers. We even saw Quentin Johnson show up. So Amarion Hampton, I've been on him since before the draft. I think he's the best running back in the draft. And I'm not going to say not named Ashton Jeanty because I'm including Ashton Jeanty. I think he's going to have the better career. The Raiders weren't effective at running the ball last week. So there's 2 things at play here. You're not going to beat a Pete Carroll team if you're not balanced. You're not going to beat a Jim Harbaugh team if you're not balanced. I just trust the Chargers more. Now, Geno Smith, 362 yards last week. He's a yard machine. But him and Justin Herbert are similar in a lot of ways. They're a lot of similar in a lot of ways. They get a lot of yards, but don't necessarily you don't see it in the scoreboard as far as the points scored in the game. So I think this is going to be a knuckle dragger. I think this is going to be another game that you just pound the under. Elandon Roberts got hurt last week. Brock Bowers hurt last week. We'll see if he plays. I'm not sure he will, even though you do have until Monday, so you have the extra day to get him ready. But he didn't practice, so there's your sign, potentially. So I'm going to go with the Chargers to win this game. I think the atmosphere is going to be electric. I think it's going to be a close game. So I'm going to take the Chargers, and I'm going to call it 23-13. All right, so that's your NFL picks for the week. Now we got to talk about some college football. And I know I say this every week, but I just got to let you know again, college football, my first love. Yes, he did, Mike. Say he's a good player too, but he ain't Brock Bowers. So Whenever we talk college football here on Sports Reports Disorder, I always started off with upset alert. I'm going to give you the upsets that I'm picking. I'm going to give you the upsets that I'm thinking about. So let's take it from the top. Give me Cal at home, 2.5-point underdog to Minnesota. 2 freshman quarterback, true freshman, 1 on the road, 1 that got to travel. Just give me the home team. Nothing more, nothing less. Just give me the home team. Duke over Tulane. You know, Tulane's been getting this love that is reserved for USF. Tulane has a Power 4 win. It was Northwestern. You know, they got, Jake Retzlaff. He looks good so far. But the thing about Tulane is that you got an ACC team coming in there, and I saw people begging for it to be sold out. And then you wonder why power conferences aren't looking at you. Now, granted, Tulane's a private school. They're not USC. They're not Miami. But you're in Louisiana, damn it. This is football country. Get your asses to the football game. That's simple. Duke was probably the better team than Illinois last week. They just had some really bad turnovers, to include the red zone. So I'm taking Duke. Give me Southern Miss over Appalachian State. Love Coach Charles Huff. This is the big one that we want, one of the big ones, because I don't know, man, but give me Arkansas. Arkansas, straight up over Ole Miss down in Oxford. And before you laugh, before you judge me, before you say 2-5, that's stupid, don't forget that Ole Miss lost to Kentucky at home last year, and that was with Jackson Dart. Austin Simmons came in this year and was supposed to be the prodigy. He was supposed to be the next of that lineage of Ole Miss quarterbacks. He's got more interceptions than touchdowns. You know who they played so far? Georgia State and Kentucky. He's also hurt, by the way, injured. We don't even know if he's going to go. So if the backup comes in, expect a lot of run. Last year, Ole Miss put up 63 on Arkansas. But again, that was Jackson Dart. BC and Stanford, I'm not going to pick the upset, but I love the over. Both of BC starting corners out. Over only at 44.5 out on the farm. Traveling east to west that way. I'm just saying. And then give me Delaware. I'm not going to pick the upset. It's a 9.5-point spread, but it's dropped. It started at 9.5. Now it's down to 7.5 because I think the market's feeling how I'm feeling. Oh, fuck it. No guts, no glory, right? Give me Delaware over UConn. And, let's get to it. So, the SEC. The SEC on ABC. The Georgia Bulldogs going into Knoxville, Tennessee. The last time Tennessee beat Georgia, it took a Hail Mary from Josh Dobbs to Jawan Jennings. Okay, that was 2016. Since then, Georgia has not lost 8 of the games since then, 8 of the 9 games since then. Georgia's won by at least 14. Last year, Nico was supposed to be the guy that was going to end it. It was between the hedges. Now you're at home. Now, Tennessee's got some secondary injuries as well. But who's not hurt? Colton Hood, SEC Defensive Player of the Week in week 1. As much as you would like to point to Tennessee's secondary being banged up, being a negative, you have to remember who Georgia's quarterback is, Gunnar Stockton. And what I've noticed about Gunnar Stockton over the last couple of weeks is that if you give him time to think, he will be lackluster. So when you go back and look at his career so far, he had an unfortunate situation where he had to try to save the SEC championship game, against Texas, where he did. Then they had the playoff game against Notre Dame. Okay, they lost that game. Then you had months off because it was the off season. You come back, you play Marshall, who half of their team is in Hattiesburg, Mississippi right now. You play Austin Peay. Now, granted, Austin Peay beat Middle Tennessee State, FBS team, but it was Austin Peay. Now, I know there's been people out here saying that Georgia was playing it close to the vest. Come on now. You can't play it close to the vest with a quarterback like Gunnar Stockton. He needs all the effort, all the plays. He needs to get these reps, and they need to be meaningful. On top of that, this is the first time that Kirby Smart has been the head coach at Georgia where I go, man, that Georgia offensive line doesn't look very good. And I talked about this in the offseason. Man, I got questions about that Georgia secondary, besides KJ Bolden, of course. Tennessee hasn't exactly played world beaters, but they've played a quarterback, Joey Aguilar, who might not be considered to be as talented as Nico, but he's a better decision maker so far, even though that wasn't his strength last year. So far, so good against weaker competition, of course. Here's the question that I propose to you. What's the line between overconfidence and belief? Because the cliche talking point is Tennessee's being told how great they are all week. Everybody's kissing them and giving them flowers, and now they believe, and then they're going to get humbled by Georgia. And look at Colorado with the long rushing touchdown. But the only reason, and this is one of those things, the only reason I think a lot of people are picking Georgia the way that they are is because they got a G on their helmet. And because their name is Georgia. And in college football, we tend to hold on, even though it's different teams, we hold on to that's Kirby Smart. Because we saw what Nick Saban did. Kirby Smart, as great as he is not Nick Saban. Now, Tennessee had a dragon to slay a few years ago. It was called Alabama. And they've since beaten Alabama twice. Georgia's the new dragon. So I believe, as much as Zachariah Branch and the gang may be able to get open against these backup corners, besides Colton Hood, I don't know if they have the quarterback to make them pay. So I say all that to say, give me the Vols. I'm taking Tennessee in the upset, 27-23. Neyland Stadium, goalpost in the river, down goes Georgia. And guess what? If that happens, don't forget 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks, Alabama's coming into Athens. Talk about a big game with stuff on the line. Whew, I tell you what. USF at Miami. USF, America's sweetheart, right? 17.5-point underdog. So what has USF done this season? They beat a Boise State team that didn't have Ashton Jeanty anymore. Nobody thinks of Maddox Matson as an elite quarterback. They went into the swamp last week and beat a Gator team that I didn't think was very good to begin with. It's another one of those, hey, they're in the SEC. Their name is Florida. Let's rank them. And no, before you even go there, I'm not saying that because I'm a Florida State fan. I'm saying that because DJ Lagway can't stay on the field. I'm saying that because there hasn't been a lot of adversity that he's had to deal with. And we'll get back into that a little bit later as we continue predictions here. So can USF win this game? I mean, they're stepping on the field. Sure, they could win. They're not going to. The worst thing that happened to USF was they won in the swamp last week. Why do I say that? Because the Gators go to Miami next week, right? So USF plays in Tampa. So you're not going to catch Miami falling asleep. Or, I'm sorry. You're not going to catch Miami falling asleep. Now, if USF would have went down to Gainesville, got smacked around a little bit, maybe you could say Miami's looking ahead to the game against the Gators next week. But since USF won that game in the swamp and Miami's got Florida coming in next week, there's no way that Miami's not ready for this game. Now, last year, these two teams met up down in Tampa. It was a 22-15 halftime game. Byron Brown was doing the things. USF looked like they could hang. They looked like athletically they belonged on the field with Miami. And then you know what happened after that? Miami outscored them 28-0 in the second half. Now, I don't think it looks like that this year. Alex Gold is too good of a head coach for that to happen again. And he's not going to be at USF next year, by the way. unless North Carolina gets invited to the SEC and USF is the replacement. But anyway, the problem for USF is they've had too much success too soon going into Hard Rock Stadium. And granted, I know I make the joke about the Miami fans. They only show up once or twice a year. But now they got a reason to show up because they weren't expecting you to be where you are. I saw Miami dominate Notre Dame, push Notre Dame's vaunted offensive and defensive line around. So there's no way in hell you're going to force penetration against them. There's no way in hell you're going to block, Ruben Bain. And all offseason, I've been talking about Corey Heatherman, the new defensive coordinator at Miami. This is not the same Miami defense from last year. And oh, by the way, against that bad Miami defense last year, you scored 15 points and got shut out in the second half. So there's no way in good faith that I can pick USF to win this game outside of me being a Florida State fan. But I got to be objective here. That's what I try to do, even though I hate it sometimes. But with that being said, I think USF covers. Not because they're going to play Miami close, but because Mario Cristobal is going to get a lead and sit on the ball. We saw that against Notre Dame. This is what he does. He goes up a couple of scores. He tries to run the clock out with 8 minutes left in the game. No, you still have to run an offense for a few more minutes. Then you can run the clock out. So old habits die hard. I think USF gets the cover, but I got Miami winning. Clemson at Georgia Tech. I hate this game for so many reasons. This offseason, when I was looking at the ACC, we did our ACC preview, myself and Mr. Logical, obviously he couldn't make it tonight. But, when we were talking about the ACC, I said, you know what? Clemson's going to lose 2 games. I didn't think LSU would be one of them, so that's out the way. But I said, Georgia Tech's going to clip them. Louisville's going to get them again, just like they got them last season. But that's the problem, right? Clemson had that performance against Troy last week. They're 16-3 at home. They had to turn it on in the second half. Haynes King, a little banged up, didn't play last week. I didn't know college football had load management. But then Vegas started talking. I saw this line open up at 6.5, right? I went to go take a shower, and it was down to 3.5. So Dabo Swinney is now in a position to do what Dabo Swinney does best, is paint the picture that it's us against the world. That's what he lives off of. He leaves a lot to be desired as far as X's and O's. But he's a damn good head coach because he will get you motivated. He will get you to run through that wall. Similar to Mike Tomlin in a lot of ways. Not exactly the coaches that you're going to go to for tactician and strategy type scenarios. But if you need to be woken up, you need to be motivated, you need to know that your ass is on fire, those are the guys that you want in the foxhole with you. So I'm going to go against myself here, and I'm going to say that Cade Klubnik finally snaps out of it and eats up Georgia Tech's secondary. Now, I do think this is going to be a close game, and by close, I mean within 10 points. So give me Clemson 31-21 against my will, and I'm going to still be hoping that Georgia Tech wins. Now, with that being said, I'm not going to do the hypocrite thing, right? Because I said I picked Georgia Tech off season. I'm picking Clemson tonight. Clemson's the official pick. So if Georgia Tech wins, I'm not going to come back and say, see, I told you in the offseason. I'm not going to do that. We're going to keep it real. Sports reports is ordered. Give me Clemson. All right. A&M at Notre Dame. Shout out to my baby graduating from A&M this year. All right. Rematch from last season. Last season, Notre Dame came down to College Station, and they punked A&M. They walked into an SEC stadium, into a stadium in the state of Texas, and said, we own this, right? 23-13 was the final score. Couple of different things at play here now. The quarterback that started that game for Texas A&M is on my TV right now, playing against Colorado. The quarterback that Notre Dame had is in Indianapolis right now. But there are more differences. Even though Notre Dame still has Jeremiah Love, guess what? A&M's got both of their running backs back, Reuben Owens and Le'Veon Moss. And what might be the difference in this game, if A&M is able to pull this out, is the receiving core. They went out and got KC Concepcion from NC State. They went out and got Mario Craver from Mississippi State. So now A&M could do some things that they couldn't do before. Now, the question is, Marcel Reed, right? I like him. He's still growing. He's still developing. He's not a finished product yet. But that's not the big problem. The big problem is Mike Elko is the head coach of Texas A&M. And if you remember anything about Mike Elko, he was the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame a few years ago. He was the head coach at Duke that started this turnaround that Manny Diaz is continuing. But he's known for defense. Hard-nosed defense that shuts down the line of scrimmage, makes life hard on you. I don't know if you've watched A&M this year. They looked awful against Utah State last week, especially against the run. Hello, Jeremiah Love. They looked awful against UTSA week 1. And trust me, I went to UTSA's game against Texas State last week. Those wide receivers from UTSA couldn't catch COVID if they were locked in the closet with Rudy Gobert. So I don't want to hear anything about this vaunted A&M defense until they show it proved. Now, you could make the argument, right? Maybe they were playing down to their competition. Maybe, they were just working on things to prepare for Notre Dame. Fernando Mendoza's he's a stud, man. He's better than Curtis Rourke for sure. So I think Indiana's still live for the playoffs, by the way. And by the way, Mike, hey, Indiana's got Illinois coming in next week, so big one there. But anyway, A&M and Notre Dame. So what are we going to see from Notre Dame? Because if you go back to the Miami game, I spent about, I'd say 4/5 of that game saying, give the damn ball to Jeremiah Love. And they didn't do it nearly enough. They got Jadarian Price out there. He averaged 7.5 yards per carry against Miami. You know how many carries he had? 6. So I expect Notre Dame to run. And CJ Carr's got some legs on him, so you might see him implement it more into the run game this time around. The bad news for A&M, besides the defensive things that I talked about, Notre Dame's coming off of a bye. But first of all, who the hell has a bye in week 2 anyway? The other thing here, if Notre Dame loses this game, I'm not going to go as far as to say that their season is over, but it's pretty damn close. They got USC later in the year. I think Pitt's going to be a little bit better than people think, so maybe Pitt could be a decent win. But there's not a lot of meat left on Notre Dame's schedule outside of this game. So if they lose this game, they may be in trouble as far as making the playoff. They're not going to go 6-6 or anything like that. I'm just talking playoff purposes. So the last time we saw them, they got whipped by Miami. I don't care what the score said. They got whipped on both lines of scrimmages. You don't think Marcus Freeman going to do something about that? You don't think he's been screaming about that during this bye week? I'm sorry, but I'm taking Notre Dame. Sorry, baby, I love you. I'm taking Notre Dame to win this game. Now, I saw the spread at 6.5. I'm taking A&M to cover. Taking A&M to cover. But give me something along the lines of 24-20. All right. I brought them up earlier. I said I was going to come back to it. The Florida Gators going down to Death Valley. You know what? This game has always had moments. Remember Florida LSU, the Tim Tebow called me. They had his phone number and they were harassing him all week. LSU in Florida gave us that fake field goal where the kicker or the holder flipped it over his shoulder. I don't know how he wasn't down because his knee started on the ground, but we'll get into that a whole nother time. They had the issue a couple of years ago where the Florida player threw the LSU player's shoe. At the end of the day, 9.5 point spread. I saw it down to 7.5. Florida and LSU gives us the fireworks. It gives us the drama. So even though the Gators are in the position that they're in, I think the drama is evident. It's going to happen. The Gators are going to cover, but to what degree? Now, this game could get very ugly. Why? Because as I said, adversity, right? So last year, DJ Lagway had an interesting year. They were up 20-6 on Georgia in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party before he got hurt. I'm not just going to take the cocktail away. It is what it is. He got hurt in that game, and Georgia ended up coming back to win. Okay. He didn't play against Texas last year. As I was going through my notes and, trying to figure this out, this is his first road game. His first road game is at LSU at night. So this could get ugly. But I think that the Gators play for Billy Napier. He might not be the coach that's going to be there next year, but they play hard for him. Granted, his record is 20-20, 10-14 in the SEC. But remember, we thought he was going to get fired last year until he beat Ole Miss, until they beat LSU. So don't count the Gators out just based on what we've seen. Count them out because they got to go to LSU. Count them out because they got to go to Miami next week. They get their bye week, get Texas coming in, and then they go to College Station. Count them out because of that. But for this individual game, I'm giving Florida a puncher's chance. I'm going to say that it's close. I'm going to say that it's low scoring, and I'm talking about to the tune of something like 17-13. It ain't too crazy. The USF game was 18-16. All right, some last-minute thoughts before we get out of here. So we got Vandy going to South Carolina, Williams-Brice Stadium. I got a couple of thoughts on this game. I'm not going to repeat the same thing about, hey, they both played Virginia Tech. I'm not going to repeat that. This is all I'm going to offer about this game. I saw the spread initially around 7 or so, 7.5 or so. Got down to as low as 3.5 I saw. This is the thing. Normally, you would think that a team like Vanderbilt might be rattled going into Willie-Brice. Except for they're bringing a quarterback in who's won twice at Auburn at 2 different schools. So the big environment doesn't scare him. They have a defensive head coach. So they're going to be sound. They're going to be disciplined because he's a very good defensive head coach, Clark Lee. Their quarterback also beat Alabama last year. Now, granted, it was at home, but that game kept Alabama out of the playoffs probably. So Vanderbilt is not afraid of the moment. Don't look at Vanderbilt as just their Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is very live to win this game. South Carolina hasn't looked good this season yet. I know Nick Harbor's made some plays. He's supposed to. Look at him, right? Lenore Sellers still isn't necessarily a passer. He's the best rusher they have right now. So spy him, take that away. You give yourself a chance to win this game. Now I'm going to pick South Carolina in a close one. 16 in a row over Vandy, by the way. But if Vandy wins, I'm not going to be surprised. Akron. Yes, Akron. I'm going to talk about Akron for a quick second. They have not scored in their 2 games this year. They lost to Wyoming, and they lost to Nebraska, by, combined 78-0 or something like that. They're going up against UAB, Trent Dilfer. So they're going to score. We'll see how many. I just wanted to bring that up. The backyard brawl back tomorrow, Pitt. I've seen them favored by 7.5. I don't think it's enough. The game is at Morgantown. So, you're going to hear a lot of crowd. It's going to be an intense game. I just don't think Rich Rod has the horses yet. I just don't think they do. That's why I picked Ohio to beat them last week. They just don't have the horses. There's a game going on right now, right? Syracuse and Colgate. Me and Mike got into this argument in the comments last week because Fran Brown had the guys running sprints after the game that they won, against UConn. So no respect for UConn, said. So I just wanted to bring up the all-time series record in this. Syracuse is winning 38-3 right now. Indiana's up 66-0. Houston's up 16-7 on Colorado, about to go to halftime shortly. But the all-time series coming into this game tonight was Syracuse 32-31 with 5 ties. So, it's another great weekend of football, guys, and ladies, and next week, we got some more games coming down the pipe, but September 27th, that's what I got my eye on, right? Oregon at Penn State. We got Alabama at Georgia that same day. And oh, by the way, on September 22nd, Sports Reports is ordered for those of you that are new on, to watching the show. We are live every Tuesday and Friday. So on the 22nd, that Tuesday, we have Isaac Doobie coming in. He's the student play-by-play commentator for the Oregon Ducks. So we're going to preview the Oregon-Penn State game with him, and I'm looking forward to that. So all you podcasters out there, you want to come talk to the gods on Sports Reports is Ordered, come on in. We're welcoming everybody with us. Like, review, subscribe, share, rate, do all the free things. Do all those good things. I'm speaking out for Mr. Logical. Jersey is in the building. He'll be back on Tuesday. I'll be back on Tuesday to talk about what happened this weekend and lead us down the road. Before you blink it, it's going to be time for some NBA. Y'all do the damn thing. Hold it down. Enjoy your football. Keep the sports takes live and fresh. Saying respectful and all that. And I love y'all.
Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chasing, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout. Mic check, lights flash, game time, stay ready. 2 vets in the zone, keep the pressure real heavy. Big hits, big plays, yeah, we breaking it down. Truth rings.